This is Ethan Chapin, and these are the wounds that he suffered from before he passed on. The released autopsy report is first. What follows after are depictions of the wounds that Ethan sustained before his death. These are graphic depictions of wounds for research, so please use caution. What follows next is the autopsy report for Ethan Chapin. I was planning on reading it all, but it's all here for you if you want to just pause and read it for yourself. I'm going to skip ahead to where the actual depictions of the wounds are so then I can give you what I sort of perceive from the photographs. And I guess I should also say the depictions from what the autopsy report says, like the painting that it puts, the portrayal of it. I don't know, but yeah. As I'm also recording this voiceover, I'm watching the video as it plays and noticing that it's a little blurry, so I don't know if it's actually blurry in the video or not. If it is, just let me know, and then we'll just actually stop and go over the document section by section. Yeah, so I don't know. But we are almost at the depiction of wounds, so let's go there. What follows next are depictions of wounds for Ethan J. Chapin. I took the autopsy report, looked at the wound, mapped it out, and it's not going to be exact because of course we don't have pictures, but from the autopsy report and the description, this is what I came up with. So, stab and incised wounds of head and neck. 4. 1. Entrance. On the right parietal scalp above the right ear is an approximately 1.5 by 1/4 inch linear stab wound oriented from 7 o'clock to 1 o'clock. The 7 o'clock end is squared and the 1 o'clock end is sharp. Discontinuous 1/16 inch red marginal abrasion is present. An approximately 1.5 by up to a 1/2 inch triangular abraded red contusion is present at the posterior and superior margins of the wound, widest superiorly. At the 7 o'clock end, a 1/8 inch laceration extends inferiorly from the anterior corner of the wound. The hemorrhagic wound tract travels along the skull, involving the scalp, subcutaneous tissue, temporalis muscle, and temporal parietal glia. Associated findings. There is a moderate associated subscalpular, subgaleal, and temporalis muscle hemorrhage. There is a thin film of blood in the subdural space overlying the left cerebral convexity. Depth and direction. The wound tract travels from the decedent's back to front and downward to a depth of approximately 7 inches. 2. Entrance. On the left parietal scalp above and behind the left ear is an approximately 2 by 3/16 inch curvilinear incised wound with undermining extending anteriorly and 1/16 inch red marginal abrasion. Path. The hemorrhagic wound tract travels along the skull, involving the scalp, subcutaneous tissue, and left temporalis muscle. Associated findings. There is a moderate associated subscalpular, subgaleal, and temporalis muscle hemorrhage. There is a thin film of blood in the subdural space overlying the left cerebral convexity. Depth and direction. The wound tract travels from the decedent's left to right and back to front, to a depth of approximately 1 inch. Okay, so I wanted to just put an idea out there, I guess. So I'm putting together the descriptions of the pictures of the autopsy. For Ethan's wound 1 and wound 2, I have a doll head. I'm a cosmetologist now, and so I have a ton of doll heads. I also have knives. They're over in the other room, but I figured I didn't need to stab it. I could just show you it. So we have a doll head. If you are, say, attacking someone, they're over here, and you jump on them or attack them from the front, here's the head, if I can get it up. For wound 1 and wound 2, it looks to me like it was done like that, a little bit further back because it was running away, like that. Okay, if you look, this one would more have a straight angle. This one would be slightly more curved because if you're right-handed, you're using your dominant hand, so you curve that hand in more. If you're left-handed, you would curve your left hand in more. But like that. And then this one is more for like control, and this was the 7-inch one. This one was only like a quick one, and then the neck one. So do more stuff with a friend here, but that was my thoughts for that, is that it seemed to have happened quick. The one on the left, 7 inches, that's super deep. Like very deep. 7 inches. That's like dunk. That's like that much. And so that would be more of a holding them in place thing. Weird. 3. Entrance. On the lateral left cheek, anterior to the left ear, is an approximately 1 by 3/16 inch linear stab wound oriented from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock. The 12 o'clock end is sharp and the 6 o'clock end is squared. 1/16 to 3/8 of an inch dark red abrasion is present at the margins of this wound, widest inferiorly and continuous with a 1/4 inch linear abrasion extending anteriorly from the inferior end of this wound. Path. The hemorrhagic wound track involves the skin, subcutaneous tissue, and musculature of the left cheek, passing between the mandible and zygomatic arch to enter the oral cavity. Associated findings. None. Depth and direction. The wound track travels from the decedent's left to right and downward. Depth cannot be accurately assessed due to the wound track entering the oral cavity. 4. Entrance. On the left neck is a gaping 1 1/4 by a 1/2 inch linear stab wound, oriented from 10 o'clock to 4 o'clock. The 10 o'clock end is squared and the 4 o'clock end is sharp. Path. The hemorrhagic wound track involves the skin, subcutaneous tissue, superficial and deep musculature, and left internal jugular vein. Associated findings. There is abundant associated soft tissue hemorrhage. The left jugular vein is perforated. Depth and direction. The wound track travels from the decedent's front to back and downward to a depth of approximately 1.5 inches. Alright, so before we move on to the stab wound of the torso, I just wanted to point out a few things. Number 4, whatever the weapon was, it left a squared side and then a sharp side. For number 3, it also was, so for the 10 o'clock end is squared and the 4 o'clock end is sharp on the left neck. So that'd be right here. So I'm assuming maybe it goes like this. So it'd be squared here, 4 o'clock end sharp. Maybe. It could be reversed. It could just be backwards. And I think that it actually is reversed because it goes front to back, and for 4 it also goes front to back. And so that would be like if someone was standing, say like behind them, and like that. And since the entrance wound is squared, it would be in the front to the back squared slice for both of those. Stab wound of torso 1. Entrance. On the left supraclavicular skin is a gaping 2.5 by 1 inch linear stab wound, oriented from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock. The 9 o'clock end is sharp and the 3 o'clock end is rounded, showing an approximately 4.5 inch linear incised and abraded tail extending laterally to the anterior left axilla. Path. The hemorrhagic wound track involves the skin, subcutaneous tissue, superficial and deep musculature, confluence of the left internal jugular and subclavian veins, and left subclavian artery. Associated findings. There is abundant associated soft tissue hemorrhage. Clotted blood is visible at the base of the wound. The left internal jugular and subclavian veins and left subclavian artery are perforated. Depth and direction. The wound track travels from the decedent's front to back and downward to a depth of approximately 4 inches. So this one also travels front to back, and it seems like it would be in the same sequence of events as 3 and 4, just because it's like the same direction. Incised wounds of upper extremities. 6. 1 to 3. Entrance. On the dorsal aspect of the right hand, at the base of the index, 4th, and 5th fingers, are superficial incised wounds measuring 1/8 of an inch, a 1/2 inch, and a 1/2 inch respectively. The wounds on the 4th and 5th fingers show irregular edges. Path. The hemorrhagic wound tracks involve the skin and subcutaneous tissue. Associated findings. None. Depth and direction. The wound tracks travel from the decedent's back to front to a depth of 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch. Alright, so real fast. For incised wounds of upper extremities, I think that the thing portrayed this wrong. I think that, like, it's right here and it's like here and here, right? So it's like punched someone, but also punched them wrong because those fingers got injured. Normally the 4th and 5th fingers don't get injured unless you don't know how to punch and you like miss. So it's like that. 4. Entrance. On the palmar aspect of the right hand at the hypothenor eminence is a superficial 3/8 of an inch linear incised wound. Path. The hemorrhagic wound track involves the skin. Associated findings. None. Depth and direction. The wound track travels from the decedent's front to back to a depth of approximately 1/16 of an inch. For this one, that'd be like in defense, like you're putting it up and it slices right there. It'd be like that one. So, slice. 5. Entrance. On the ventral left wrist is a transversely oriented 1 3/4 by 3/8 of an inch linear incised wound with a superficial 1/8 of an inch incised tail extending medially and a 1/2 by 1 3/4 inch incised and abraded tail extending proximally from the lateral end of the wound. Path. The hemorrhagic wound track involves the skin, subcutaneous tissue, superficial musculature, and flexor tendons. Associated findings. There is a moderate associated soft tissue hemorrhage. Depth and direction. The wound track travels from the decedent's front to back to a depth of approximately a 1/2 an inch. 6. Entrance. On the dorsal aspect of the left hand, at the base of the left index finger, is a 1/2 inch superficial incised wound. Path. The hemorrhagic wound track involves the skin. Associated findings. None. Depth and direction. The wound track travels from the decedent's front to back to a depth of approximately 1/16 inch. When it comes to the left hand, that's also a defensive one because it's slicing. This also sounds like a jab almost. But yeah. Those both sound like defensive wounds to me. Stab and incised wounds of lower extremities. 6. 1. Entrance. On the medial right thigh is a 9/16 by 1/16 inch stab wound, oriented from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock. Both ends are sharp. Yellow abrasion is present at the margins of the wound, extending up to a 1/2 inch from the 9 o'clock end of the wound, and a 1/4 inch superficial incised tail extends laterally from the 3 o'clock end of this wound. Path. The minimally hemorrhagic wound track involves the skin, subcutaneous tissue, and superficial musculature of the medial thigh. Associated findings. The skin superior to this wound shows a linear 4-inch linear abrasion. Depth and direction. The wound track travels from the decedent's left to right and back to front to a depth of approximately 1 inch. 2. Entrance. At the lateral right knee is a gaping 4 by 1 inch linear incised wound, 5 inches when reapproximated. Path. The hemorrhagic wound track involves the skin, subcutaneous tissue, and musculature. Associated findings. There is moderate associated soft tissue hemorrhage. Depth and direction. The wound track travels from the decedent's right to left and slightly back to front to a depth of approximately 1¼ inches. 3. Entrance. On the lateral right calf is a gaping 2½ by 3/4 inch linear stab wound, 3 inches when reapproximated, oriented from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock. The 12 o'clock end is squared and the 6 o'clock end is sharp. Path. The minimally hemorrhagic wound track involves the skin, subcutaneous tissue, and musculature. Associated findings. None. Depth and direction. The wound track travels from the decedent's right to left and back to front, to a depth of approximately 3½ inches. 4 to 6. Entrance. On the posterior left thigh is a gaping wound complex consisting of at least 3 intersecting stab wounds, measuring 1¼ inches, 2½ inches, and 2¼ inches in length from lateral to medial with a combined width of up to 2 inches. Path. The hemorrhagic wound tracks involve the skin, subcutaneous tissue, and musculature. Associated findings. There is abundant associated soft tissue hemorrhage. Depth and direction. The wound tracks travel from the decedent's back to front to a depth of approximately 4 inches. Okay, so for the stab and incised wounds of lower extremities, kind of wanted to show it, but like, all I have is this, right? I have a shark. And I have the head, right? Shark. So his right would be over here. His left would be here. If he's laying down, face up. Okay? If he's laying down like this, it would be like that. So let's just take the first wound, the depth and direction. The wound track travels from the decedent's left to right and back to front to a depth of approximately 1 inch. And so it's on the right thigh, right? And so it would be back to front. If it was back to front, this is already his back because on the autopsy, he's laying down. So back to front, you would be stabbing forward. So that can't be it. So he's up like this, or at least facing this way. His right leg is over here. His left leg is over here. Okay? That's the only way that you can get back to front slices, because say like this is his leg, right leg. You're in like that in the middle of his legs. You have a knife, right? Stab, stab, stabby. And you're slicing whichever way you can. So it might even be in this one, slice this way, but they're in the middle of his legs if the slices are back to front, slicing that way. And then it would have to be the knife's there. So if you're slicing that way, so it would be stabbed like that then. But if back to front, that'd be the only way for it to go like that. And I don't see any front to back. There was like a slight, wound 2 was slightly back to front, but everything was back to front. There were no front to backs. Yeah. And so this is the weapon depiction. Based on characteristics of the least distorted wound, the findings are consistent with a blade approximately 5 32 to 3 1/16 in thickness. Okay, so before we move on to Xana, I wanted to touch base on this weapon real fast first, because it's talking about the blade thickness, right? And so when it says based on characteristics of the least distorted wound, the findings are consistent with the blade approximately 5 out of 32 to 3 out of 16th in thickness. And it says, based on that wording alone, no one can determine the exact knife model. The autopsy is only describing the wound characteristics and then giving a very broad estimate. Consistent with a blade approximately 5 out of 32 to 3 out of 16th inches in thickness. That's referring to the thickness of the blade spine, so like the back part of it, not the blade width or length. A blade spine thickness 5 out of 32 to 3 out of 16th inches, about 4 to 4.8 millimeters, would generally fit a medium to heavy fixed blade knife rather than a thin kitchen paring knife or pocket knife. Examples of blade profiles that commonly fall into that range are this and this one. Looks interesting to me. And it says the wound description suggests, I'll just show. Actually, that is probably backwards for you, so I'll just read it. The wound descriptions suggest wound number 1 had 2 sharp ends and a superficial tail, which is consistent with a sharp pointed blade entering and then moving slightly. Wound number 3 had one end described as squared and one end sharp, which can occur with a single-edged knife where the sharpened end. Man, it's much easier to just say it when I'm just talking and not giving like the actual description thing. So let's try this again. The wound descriptions suggest wound number 1 had 2 sharp ends and a superficial tail, which is consistent with a sharp pointed blade entering and then moving slightly. Wound number 3 had one end described as squared and one end sharp, which can occur with a single-edged knife where the sharpened edge creates one acute angle and the spine side creates a blunter squared angle, which is what I was saying, like how this one was square and up, so like this would be where the spine of the knife is. Wounds 4 to 6 were a complex of intersecting stab wounds, making it harder to use those wounds for blade shape determination because overlapping wounds distort the margins. So like they depict like a fixed blade knife, a single-edged pointed tip, a spine thickness around 5 out of 32 to 3 out of 16ths. And that was what you saw at the end. So all of those knives there with those ones for the alternate blade profiles. Because I always just like to have alternatives just because it's always good to always have alternatives unless you know for sure. Because if you know for sure, then you don't need alternatives. But yeah, so that was the weapon. Or I personally think it was more than one weapon. Could be slightly correct because then it would be here, left, defense, because you're defending, it would be defending legs. Oh my gosh. So that is so far what I think from this autopsy report. It could change, and I could just be all wrong and everything like that, but from what it says and what is portrayed, would this one have been the scalp one then? Because they said that it looked like he was scalped. Because that would have been on the left side. Then my whole thing like doesn't work. I feel like he would have to be like right-handed. Left-handed. But yeah, so, because the left hand would have to like hold. But then that would be on the right side. But then also you could. I don't know. That's what I got, so yeah. I'm also thinking about putting a little like graph or some type of picture together for the depth and direction, because based off of that you can also figure out if they're left or right-handed. I just wasn't focused on that during this one, but that would be for another one.